Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Yasmine S, cardiologist and best-selling author, and this is my podcast, Positive Vibes on the Sunny Side. Each episode, my goal is to bring you uplifting stories and insights to inspire you to live your happiest, healthiest, most positive life. So thank you for joining me. Hello again. Today I'm talking with Kathy Bingham Turner and Leon Alligood about their new book, Boss Brooks, a true story of fraud, family, and forgiveness from Tennessee to Texas. Now, I want to go ahead and tell you why I think this book fits into my ORCHID model for positive living, and therefore this podcast. You'll remember that the letters of ORCHID represent the following: O for optimism, R for resilience, C for creativity, H for health, I for integrity, and D for determination. As you'll see, the story in the book we're discussing today is one of resilience. That's the R in ORCHID. Resilience on many levels and by many of the different people involved. It's also very much a story of determination and, in some ways, of creativity as well, as we'll get to in the interview, I'm sure. But it's also a story about forgiveness, which can be a very important part of resilience. And in the end, it's a story about dealing with family secrets. Now, this particular family secret, as you'll see, is a real doozy. But all families have their own secrets, great or small, and the way Kathy Bingham Turner has dealt with hers is a story that I think we all can learn from and reflect upon. So, who are my interviewees, the co-authors of this book? Well, Kathy Bingham Turner is a former corporate director of human resources for newspapers in 10 states. This book, Boss Brooks, is about her grandfather, and uncovering the complicated truth about him became a passion for her after retirement in Franklin, Tennessee. And as always, I will have a link to where you can find the book in the show notes. Her co-author, Leon Alligood, is Professor Emeritus of Journalism at Middle Tennessee State University, known around here as MTSU, and Leon was previously a reporter covering rural Middle Tennessee in a career spanning 2 decades and garnering numerous awards. He holds a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Nonfiction from Goucher College and was chosen for the Tennessee Journalism Hall of Fame. He lives near Lebanon, Tennessee. Now, Positive Vibes listeners, I have a connection to Leon that I need to tell you about. When I was researching my first book, Walk Through Fire, The Train Disaster That Changed America, and please see the very first episode of this podcast to learn all about that book and how the writing of it led to my creation of the Positive Vibes brand. I'll put links to both the episode and the book in the show notes. And in fact, this month marks the 48th anniversary of the Waverly train disaster, which that book is about. But when I was researching that book, I came across a single line in an emergency management journal article by Leon Alligood. And that single line stated that the Waverly train disaster of 1978 may have led to the establishment of FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Well, Waverly, as you know, is my own hometown, which is why I was writing the book, and I had never heard of the FEMA connection. So that blew my mind. And I contacted Leon, and he actually replied, sent me all of his documents and notes on that. And with that and further research, I was able to verify and explain that whole connection, as well as tell FEMA's origin story in my book. And it never would have happened without Leon. So I'm forever indebted to him for that. All right, so without further ado, Kathy and Leon, welcome to Positive Vibes.
So good to be here.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's so good to have you both on. And first of all, congratulations to you both on publishing this book. I know how long it took to find the right publisher, which in this case is the University of Tennessee at Knoxville.
It did take a long time, but it's been worth it. Right, Kathy?
That's right.
So, I'm hosting a podcast here and I'm supposed to know what to say, but the word that actually kept coming to my mind as I was reading your book was speechless. Okay, speechless. It took me a while to figure out where to even start with this. And I think the best way to do that actually is by reading for my listeners what's on the book's back cover, because most of my listeners will not have heard of this story. And I think having that frame of reference is going to be important for them to understand the rest of of our interview. So if it's all right with you, I'd like to read that back cover copy now, and then we'll get into the questions. Okay, so all right, listeners, this is a description of the book, Boss Brooks, A True Story of Fraud, Family, and Forgiveness from Tennessee to Texas. In 1931, Boss Bingham, the head cashier of Hardin County Bank in Saltillo, Tennessee, faked his death from a fiery auto accident and fled west to escape allegations of fraud and embezzlement. While his three children believed he was dead, Bingham reinvented himself as Marvin Lester Brooks, a rancher in Sherwood, Texas, where he married and raised a second family. Upon his death, 4 decades later, he became a man with two tombstones. In this book, Bingham's granddaughter, Kathy Bingham Turner, and journalist Leon Alligood uncover the truth about Boss's deception and explore the impacts on both his families. Through meticulous research and personal reflections, the authors delve into the history of rural Tennessee and Texas, revealing the complex legacy of a man whose final confession came only after suffering a stroke in 1972. A gripping memoir of family secrets revealed, Boss Brooks offers a compelling blend of historical context and personal discovery. Turner and Alligood have produced a captivating saga that helps us understand the multifaceted nature of family legacies. So, first of all, how did the two of you come together on this story?
Well, I began thinking about this story probably in my 50s. I think as I got older, my thoughts about family history grew to the point where I really knew that there were so many gaps of information about this story. And I really wanted to document the story as best I could for my family and future generations. The more investigation I did, the more research I did, I realized that the scope of this story went well beyond just my family. The series of events that happened in 1931 also affected the whole town of Saltillo. It affected their bank and the closing of the bank, and the impact that that had on many families who were struggling during the Depression. So it just became a bigger and bigger story that I thought needed to be told. Over the years, many rumors had persisted in that community about what happened, and much of it was not true. You know, in the absence of information, sometimes we tend to make it up for ourselves, and I think that happened over the years. So I realized I needed help in telling the story, and I was sensitive to the fact that I didn't want it to be just told as a salacious crime story because there are so many other elements in this story that are important. So I had worked with Leon at the Tennessean for many years. And over that time, I observed the writings that he did, especially human interest stories. And I would see the kind of reader reaction that he got and the treatment he gave to the stories in a respectful way. Um, I needed someone who was integral, that I could trust with this story, had good investigative journalism skills, and just could tell a great story. So as I got close to retirement, I began thinking about how to approach this, and I decided he was going to be my plan A. I was going to reach out to him and see if he might be willing to help me with this project. He was teaching at MTSU at that point. So I reached out to him, and I'll let Leon finish that.
And before
Well,
you do, Leon, just for listeners who are outside of Tennessee, the Tennessean is like one of the major Tennessee newspapers and an institution really out of Nashville, Tennessee.
that's correct. Yes, that's correct. Yes, so Kathy called me, and she told me that she had this interesting family history that she wanted to put into a book, and she knew that it was bigger than her to do. She needed some help with some things, and unbeknownst to her, when she mentioned family history, my eyes sort of rolled back in my head. So it's a good thing it was a phone call rather than person to person. Otherwise, we might not have written the book. But I'd known Kathy for many years and respected her job at Human Resources at the Tennessean. So I said, what could hurt? Let's go. Let's hear what the story is, and go from there. And we went to a restaurant downtown Nashville and met, and you know, 1 hour led to two, and I think maybe even to 3 hours, and we were still talking about Boss, and I was just um, captivated by this story. It's a story. As a reporter, I always look for those untold stories, and this one certainly fit that bill. And it's not so much that it was untold in Tennessee, but that it just wasn't told correctly. There was so much misinformation about the story. And she had so much material to begin with, and I thought, boy, we'll knock this out of the park and get it done very quickly. Unfortunately, that did not happen, and actually, fortunately, it didn't happen because as the time went by, the story became much deeper and more nuanced, and I think Kathy and I really understood the story better after a decade of working on it.
So you have been working on this book for a decade.
Be more like 12 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, I get it. That's about what happened with my book about the Waverly train disaster. And very similarly, the true history had never been told. There have been a lot of rumors floating around. I wanted to set that straight, but I couldn't find a publisher for it for a long time. And having that extra time actually turned out to be a good thing in the end. I think it made it a better book. I hear you saying the same thing.
Yeah, definitely so. Definitely so. We found so many times we were at what we thought were dead ends, and we can't take this story any further. And we'd hear about documents, treasure trove of documents that we found, either related to the insurance cases or other aspects of the legal matters involving this case, and it just became a better story.
Yeah. And so listeners can understand more of that story. Kathy, do you mind reading the excerpt from page 1617?
Sure. My father summoned me to Missouri again in the summer of 1975, between my junior and senior year of college at MTSU. Turning into the driveway, I noted numerous people, strangers to me, mingling on the lawn, but my father did not introduce me to his visitors. After enveloping me in a hug, he led me to the living room, where a slide projector was aimed at a wall. He flipped the on switch, and a beam of light brought the wall to life. Faces appeared, faces of the strangers outside my father's home, except they were younger. It was a wedding. There was a bride being escorted by a man in his 60s. I turned to my father, who watched the images with a fascination I did not understand. He turned off the machine and faced me. My father spoke calmly and clearly, so as not to be misunderstood. The older man in the film was his father, Boss Bingham. What his mother, my grandmother, had told him since he was a little boy was not the truth. Boss was not burned alive in a car crash in the winter of 1931. He moved to Texas, changing his last name to Brooks. He married another woman and had 4 children, 2 sons and 2 daughters. The daughters and their husbands were the people I saw when I pulled into the driveway. The women were my father's half sisters, my aunts. I stammered, trying but failing to understand the magnitude of this revelation. Now, you can't say a word about this to anyone outside the family, my father warned. I heard him, but failed to comprehend his heavy words rushing at me. I only caught phrases. There could be trouble. People could get arrested. This is just for us to know. And that's how I learned that my grandfather, who never rocked me as a baby or read me a bedtime story or knew anything about my life, faked his death in 1931 and began a new life in West Texas. He did so with help from friends, his siblings, and my Bible toting prayer warrior grandmother, who all conspired in different ways for different reasons to keep Boss Bingham of Saltillo, Tennessee, buried in Shady Grove Cemetery. What happened at Hardin County Bank, where my grandfather was head cashier, was central to why he left Tennessee. But it would be years before I understood all that transpired. To protect the innocent, the lie was created by my grandmother and others. Boss's departure was like a plop of a rock in a still pond. Rippling waves affected every Bingham in its path. As the years went by, those co opted by the falsehood tightened their grip on the family's secret. This made their loss even more palpable. Those closest to Boss felt the loss the most. A husband, a father, a brother, a dear friend was gone, but not dead, just not present with them, never to be present with them again. In other words, a death of another kind. The lie had to remain unchanged over time, or the scandal would be exposed and more lives ruined. The lie had to prevail. And so it did, until my grandmother died, and then my grandfather, a man known by a name other than Boss Bingham, died 2 years later. I obeyed my father's admonition never to talk publicly about our family's secret. But after his death in 2012, I resolved to deconstruct the lie. I miss my father every day, but the why of my grandfather's disappearance and its residual effects on my grandmother compelled me to take a closer look.
Wow, thank you, Kathy, for reading that. This book is just mind-blowing to me, and the whole story and how it transpired and what all the facts you've been able to uncover. And listeners, it's very well researched. But it's just mind-boggling, and I can't even imagine what it was like for you to be in that situation that you're describing with your father, with all of these strangers in the yard, and hearing this story for the first time. What could you tell us more what that was like?
Well, it was just kind of surreal. Um, I absorbed it on a certain level, but it took time really for it to really sink in and absorb with me. And I was at the age at that point, it was between the junior and senior year of my college. I had a whole lot of life going on, and I was busy with college and then getting married and then having family. So the story didn't sink in as deep as it did over time.
Yeah. And you said it was really in your 50s that you started thinking about it really deeply and wanting to put this. Was that when you first wanted to put it in a book?
Actually, originally, it the book wasn't necessarily my goal. It was just to document the story.
Mhm.
And if that's all that I had accomplished for my family, I would have been satisfied with that. But the deeper I dug, the more I just had to keep digging.
Yeah, yeah. Could you tell us, and maybe Leon, if you want to chime in too, some of the highlights that struck you as you were doing more research, beyond what you had just known from your father?
Well, there was just so much information that was available that nobody had taken the time to look for. Uh, I mentioned insurance trials a while ago, and Boss's plan for getting the bank out of trouble was to insure himself for $37,500. But when he disappeared, he left a note to the bank board saying that if something should happen to me, I would like the money to go to make the bank whole. And of course, he disappeared the next day, and that was definitely a sign to the insurance companies that something was afoot here. And so they refused to pay the death benefits. And as a result of that, Kathy's grandmother made the decision to sue the insurance companies, even though she was aware of where her husband was and knew that this was going to dig her even a deeper hole for her. Secret that just got bigger and bigger once she sued the insurance companies. And anyway, Kathy found John Ross, who is the grandson of a lawyer in Savannah, Tennessee, who represented the bank in the insurance trials. So Kathy's grandmother sued, and then the bank joined in so that they could get a share of it, of the insurance money. And then the State Department of Insurance also chimed in and joined in the lawsuit so that they can get a share as well, just to make sure that the depositors were getting as much money as they could. Um,
It struck me though, and you say this up front in the very first chapter, how Boss Bingham at the time, how he was actually able to fake his death.
Mm.
He he and several others dug up a body, from the Shady Grove Cemetery.
Yeah, that's probably the most bizarre part of the story.
Yeah.
In order for him to fake his death, and Leon has said this before, they either needed to kill someone or they needed to have a body. So they went to the local cemetery, Shady Grove, and dug up the remains of a man who had been buried 3 weeks earlier. His name was Mr. Lucas. He was an 80 some odd year old man. So he left his home about 8 o'clock that night, and he and an unknown number of other people met there at the cemetery. They dug the body up. They put the remains in Boss's car and they drove that towards Jackson, Tennessee. Then they ran it off the road, set it all on fire, and burned what was left of those remains. So it was impossible to identify. Um, they took the body to the next county in Jackson. Some of his friends went over there when they heard the news and confirmed that it was Boss's body, even though it wasn't, which leads one to think that the men who went to confirm that were also involved in the scheme. Anyway, that was how they pulled that off, and it's a wonder that worked.
There's a saying, and it just kept coming to my mind again and again as I was reading this book. There's a saying that two people can keep a secret if one of them is dead. And the fact that so many people kept this secret for so long, I just is unbelievable to me. And I
It
guess
is
because there were so many interested parties who really had a stake in this and in keeping the lie, as you call it, keeping the lie alive.
exactly. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It was it's phenomenal to think that for over four decades, the secret didn't get out, but it finally did. And at that point, that's when the two families started having these secret family reunions together uh, for many years.
How did the people of Saltillo, the town where this began, how did they react to this book?
Well, that's been really interesting. Um, in fact, recently we had a book signing there in Saltillo, and we held the book signing in this old church that sits in the middle of the Shady Grove Cemetery. So it was kind of a surreal place to be talking about this book in the very area where the story started. But the people of Saltillo, they have been curious about this story for so many years. And the arrival of this book has been a big deal. The people who came to the signing were on the edge of their seat, had lots of questions. The interest has lingered for so long and is still so strong that it's amazing.
For sure. We were Kathy as Kathy and I approached that book signing in Saltillo, we were afraid that somebody was going to stand up in the back and say, "You got it wrong." This is what really happened. And fortunately, that did not happen. People were very intrigued by how it all came about, and it didn't matter that we couldn't answer all of their questions. We don't claim to answer everything with the boss story, but there are certain things that we could answer with certainty, and that those facts had not been talked about before the book came out. So I think it was very it's almost cathartic for them in a way for many people to finally understand what the secret was all about that their parents would not talk about when they were growing up.
One person who helped us a lot with our research, he was the third generation caretaker for Shady Grove Cemetery. And he had heard, different tales over the years, and his parents had talked about it for years. And his description, I think, was the one that struck us the most. He said, learning the true story learning the true story was like a cleansing effect for him, which I just thought was very powerful.
Yeah. That
So many
that's
people, so many people had the same express different kinds of or similar thoughts to that as well. And that's very, to me and Kathy, that was very affirming. We were on the right track and we had done something good. We just didn't stir the pot so that people would get mad. This was something that was important to people in Saltillo, and we think it'll be important to people elsewhere too, particularly in Texas as the story gets out there.
Oh, I think so for sure. And how have the people in Texas, and Kathy, you have family in Texas, as this book details, how have they reacted to the book so far, or has it gotten that far yet?
It has. Several of the relatives there have read it. In particular, one of his daughters, I speak with her fairly often. We've kind of bonded as sisters, actually, over the years. She's very pleased with it, and her nieces and her daughter have all read it, and they're very pleased with it. One of the other daughters had passed away before the book came out, so of course we didn't hear her opinion. But both of the daughters were pivotal in us even knowing the truth, because if after Boss died, if they hadn't reached out to find us, we wouldn't be having this conversation. We would have never known.
Correct.
Right.
There's so much information that what happened in Texas, Tennessee folks want to know about, and what happened in Tennessee, the Texas folks want to know about. So there was curiosity on both sides, intense curiosity, and that's why We didn't really know what to expect going out to Texas to meet them, but boy, they were so open and willing to share stories and anecdotes and tons of pictures, probably thousands of pictures that we got to see Boss in various stages of his life, rather than just the one or two pictures that we had of him before he left Saltillo in 1931.
So that was such an incredible contribution. And, I was struck by the fact that they knew that he had a second family in Tennessee, whereas the reverse was not true.
Right. They knew he had a second family. They just didn't know his real name. They didn't know where he was from. Those kinds of details he never shared until he finally confessed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you
Yeah,
talk
Kathy
about it.
didn't know until we got out to Texas that in interviewing, I think it was Bobby, that when, because Bobby mentioned that there were photos of the kids from Tennessee rather. So that meant that Boss, but one of the last things he did was take photos of his three kids in Tennessee and put it in his pocket, and he took them to Texas, which I thought was very telling.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you think that he believed, it sounded like this, but I want to be sure I understand. Do you think he believed as he was leaving Tennessee that his Tennessee family would be able to follow him to Texas? Or do you think he knew that was sort of the end of that tie?
I think he hoped that that would happen, and thought maybe it could, but it wasn't long before he realized that was never going to work.
Because if everybody left, that that makes it pretty clear that there was a crime to be investigated and
And
followed.
yeah, and my grandmother at that point was being followed by insurance investigators. They were trying to prove that Boss was still alive, so they followed her every move. She knew that if she were to leave, she'd be followed.
Hmm. And you make an important point that there's a paragraph I actually want to read to listeners about, because this struck me, both, the historian and the creative writer in me, this whole book spoke to both parts of that. But, as the historical piece of this, we live in an age now that it's almost impossible to, we worry so much about having our identity stolen, right? And we have all these different ways to verify one's identity. But on page 22, toward the end of that page, here's the paragraph. Living in an age where individuals go to great lengths to protect their identities, it's hard to imagine that reinventing yourself could be as easy as changing your name. But it was possible in 1931. Driver's licenses didn't feature photos, and Social Security cards wouldn't be issued for another 5.5 years. In rural areas, birth certificates were often not issued at all. The tools employed in the 21st century to prove who we are were not available the year my grandfather disappeared. In that era, identity was based on how convincingly you led others to believe who you were. My grandfather, accustomed through his business dealings to the importance of positive first impressions, put forth his hand to a stranger and said, "My name is Marvin Lester Brooks." And he became Marvin Lester Brooks. That's mind blowing in and of itself. I think we can't even fathom that today. I didn't know that driver's license didn't have photos on them then, but that makes sense.
Right, right.
Yeah.
It was so much easier back in that day to reinvent yourself. And we discovered that from 1929 to 1932, 1.5 million men in America abandoned their families. And probably many of them, they left because of, for various reasons, shame or whatever. And perhaps they reinvented themselves too along the way because it was possible to do in that era.
Right. And when you talk about the insurance agents following investigators, following your grandmother, they didn't have surveillance cameras or, any of or cell phones or any of these things we have now. They had to watch and see if Boss ever came to visit her or if she ever left to visit him. Yeah.
Yeah, they certainly watched. In fact, we've heard that some of the investigators would even crawl up under their house to listen to conversations to see if they could get clues.
Wow. Wow. Uh, so, there's so much in that family tree at the beginning of the book. One really has to study it because it holds a lot of information, including the date of death for Lytle Boss Bingham, who then reinvented himself as Marvin Lester Brooks. So, Kathy, how difficult was it for you to trace that family tree? And then what decisions did you make and how to depict it in the book in that final version?
Actually, with the family tree, I got a lot of input from other family members, older family members who had stored information and had ancestry trees and all of that. So that part wasn't that difficult, actually.
So, why is Marvin Lester Brooks's date of birth 1900?
Well, when he got to Texas, he needed some ID. He realized I can't just go around without a piece of paper that's got my name on it. So he went to the courthouse there in Sherwood to get some sort of ID, and he went to register to vote. He figured that if he could get a piece of paper that with his name on it that he could vote, then that might lead to some other identification. And apparently, the gentleman there at the desk and the uh, taking, doing handing out registrations to vote was a friendly sort. And he looked at Boss and said, "Hey, young fella, you look like you're about 30." And Boss said, "Yeah, you're right." And so that's how 5 years got lopped off of his age. Um, and it came to hurt him in the end because he had to wait 5 extra years to get Social Security benefits,
That's right.
um, toward the end of his life. And of course, his wife, Hootsie, in Texas, had no idea that he was actually 5 years older than she knew him to be. And so it was, and of course, the daughters knew that he was in his 70s now, not in his 60s. So he was older than they knew. So that was how.
He had tuberculosis or was diagnosed with tuberculosis. Actually, that's how I came to know about this story at the beginning. Leon reached out to me about how diagnosis of TB would have been made at that time. And I have to say, by the way, when I got Leon's email and there was there was one paragraph about the story, and I was like, "What?" You know, okay, this sounds crazy, but I'll just answer the question. I don't know what story Leon is telling here, but I, I'll answer the question and let him go about his business. But but I do wonder, was he ever tested again or treated at any point for TB? Later on when treatment became available and diagnostics, there was a TB skin test that was available later in his life.
We don't know that he was ever tested again. When we don't really know how we guess that mainly his symptoms were the reason he was diagnosed with TB in the first place. When he got to Texas, he still had symptoms, and one of his daughters, told of coughing fits that would make him get to his knees, and he would just stay on the floor coughing for several minutes. So we don't really know if he was treated in any way out there for TB, or if any doctor out there ever knew that he had TB. Uh, he was always told by his doctor in Saltillo that head west where it's warmer, drier, and it's going to help you. And perhaps in time, that was the trick. West Texas certainly was drier and hotter for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And you both do a great job of weaving in the, history of the time and the history of the different geographical locations, which I really enjoyed. And I know, anyone who reads this book will enjoy that. I have more of a literary question here, talking about the writing of the book. How did you decide how to tell the story? Points of view, and then chapter one basically gives away the whole the summary of the plot at the very beginning. How did you decide on that?
Well, we went through several iterations to be sure. The second chapter was the first chapter for many, many um, years, and by this time I was reaching out to folks whose opinion I valued, and I said, "Hey, take a look at this." And one guy whose opinion I valued, he said, I think the cemetery is where you have to start. And I was so reticent to throw everything out there, but they said, I think you got to start at the cemetery because that's the thing that's going to shock people the most.
Yeah.
And you've got to make them understand this is just one piece of this very long story and this very complicated situation. And so we started with when we flopped it and made chapter two one and chapter one two, it it I got it. It seemed to flow better, and it affected the structure all the way down. From that point on, we start going back between past 1931 and the present time. Um, Not always, because during a few chapters we stay in 1931 for a couple of chapters, and then we stay in the present for a couple of chapters as well toward the end. But basically, we wanted to give the reader a look at how this unfolded in stages. And so we give you enough in the modern time to anticipate what might have happened in 1931 that they're going to catch up on in the subsequent chapters, if that makes sense.
It does. And oh, go ahead, Kathy.
One thing I was going to add about how the book was written, um, when we went into it, I wasn't necessarily thinking of it being told in my voice, but that was Leon's idea, and I think it was the right idea. Um, it was almost like he kind of jumped into my brain sometimes in the things that he would write, and that we would, or I would write and give to him, and he would rewrite, and it was almost like it was a mind meld. He was able to capture my voice.
That's incredible. And Kathy, you really chose the right person to partner with you on this book.
Well, I was afraid. I wanted to make sure that Kathy's voice came out loud and clear. And when we got our first draft done and Kathy was letting friends read it, the question I wanted to know is, does it sound like you? You know, does it sound like your voice? And they said yes. We hear you loud and clear. So I was happy. I knew I'd helped in whatever assistance I was doing with this book. We were doing something right in making sure that it sounded like her voice. I don't think it could have been told any other way, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah. And the telling of it, the way that you told it, does seem inevitable. And I think that the first recommendation you got, first friend you mentioned who gave you the piece of advice to start in the cemetery, I have to say, I think that's right, because when I read that part, I was hooked. And, that was, I mean, like, this is, you think this is a sordid tale. How? And then what comes to your mind is you want to know how. How did this happen? How did it unfold? And there are a lot of disaster stories are like that. The book I wrote being one of them. If you know, just because the reader knows what the end result was, doesn't make the story less compelling unless you allow it to be. So if you let it unfold, people usually want to know how it happened, and I think this is no different. I think you did a
Right.
really nice job of building suspense. And as the chapters go on, we learn more and more details. Then made me want to go back to the beginning, and I keep going back to the family tree and trying to figure things out. It really is a mind-boggling story. But I have a question now about the whole family secret idea.
Mm.
Um, I think, Kathy, this has been, I can't even imagine the impact it's had on you and in writing the book, the personal factor here, and what you've gone through and probably what you continue to go through processing this. Um, do you feel that the book has helped a lot in that way in your processing of the story?
Yes, one result of going through this journey is how I feel about family secrets. I I have come to just abhor them and question. I think I will forever question if I'm faced with keeping a secret that might harm others, to really evaluate, is it worth the cost of keeping the secret?
Do you mind reading chapter from page not 198 because you talk about this at the end of the book. Just if you don't mind, start at the beginning of that page and read as much as you'd like.
Okay. As I near the end of this story, let me note the most valuable lesson I learned from my grandparents was to abhor family secrets. Not every family has a secret as tragic as mine, but all families have disagreements that are ignored, divisions that are never plumbed for hidden truths. Having documented my family's experience, I'm committed to honesty and respect in all relationships and to never become a keeper of secrets. I think my father would be proud of me. When I now look at my grandfather's stoic face in that photograph taken at the bank, I sense a measure of vulnerability and desperation in his eyes, and my heart has a soft spot for him. For years, he was a stranger to me, but now I realize that I knew my grandfather better than I thought because I knew his son, my dad. There are many traits they shared: a love for gardening, a desire to be helpful, and a respect for the act of forgiveness. Indeed, forgiveness flows like a stream through the Boss Brooks story. My father forgave his mother for withholding the truth about Boss and eagerly embraced his discovered family, especially his half sisters. My great uncle Howard sought forgiveness by telling his story to his son Bill and other relatives. My grandmother's decision to release her husband from their marriage vows implies a forgiveness underpinned by a measure of love I can't fathom. Guided also by deep love was Hootsie, who forgave Brooks for concealing his past. Through prayer, my Aunt Mary Lou sought to forgive her father for leaving. It's my prayer that her petitions were heard. By revealing his past to his Texas family, my grandfather sought forgiveness for his actions in 1931. Boss Brooks was flawed, but who among humankind is not? If taking my story public does nothing else, I will be satisfied if this saga is better understood by those from Saltillo, but especially by his many descendants scattered from Tennessee to Texas and beyond, who were the heirs of my grandfather's story.
That's that's beautiful, Kathy. Thank you. And thank you both for bringing this story to the public, to light. I think it's a really important story. And, I don't know if anyone's told you this yet, but I think it has movie quality to it as well.
Many people say that.
What what would you like readers to take away from this story? I'd start with Kathy first, and then I'll go to Leon. What would you like readers to take away from it?
I think that we should just understand that all of us are flawed, and maybe sometimes the purpose of trying to figure something out is not to place blame or point fingers, but just to understand, make the effort to understand. And um, again, the family secret, if you've got one, I I would advise shining a light on it.
It's very powerful. What about you, Leon?
I take away uh, I come away with the importance of history and understanding history so that we can if we understand history, we can understand ourselves today. And I know that in Kathy's case, finding out the truth about her grandfather uh, was difficult on many in many ways, but it's also very refreshing, and it's like a new start. You understand, and I think that's very, very important. So many stories occur in families, and things happen in families, and they just somebody younger in the younger generation will ask, "Whatever happened to so and so?" And they get the answer, "We don't talk about that." And I don't think that's right. I think we need to understand what happened in our families, and it just helps us to understand today better and helps to understand ourselves better. It's why we are who we are.
That is so well said. Yes. Well, we'll get to our final question in a moment, but first of all, where can listeners find this book? I'll put a link, to online stores, but where could they find this book? Anywhere books are sold?
Pretty much, yes. utpress.org has a website, a link, and then Amazon. And we like to say go to your independent bookstore because they can order it for you if they don't have it on the shelf. So, you know, pretty much everywhere you could buy a book.
And folks, that is Boss Brooks, A True Story of Fraud, Family, and Forgiveness from Tennessee to Texas. Before we get to that final question, Leon and Kathy, do you have anything else you'd like listeners to know? Anything to add?
I just want to say that this has been the ride of my life, my writing life, to be able to work on a story like this that has so many curves and different ways to go, and so many interesting characters. And I fell in love with the story 13 years ago when Kathy and I had that first sit down, and I'm still thrilled with it. I still read it every now and then at night when I can't sleep, just to remind myself of what the story was about and why it's important.
Yeah.
And I'm just thankful that I had a collaborator that helped me tell a story that means so much to my family and has been so appreciated by the folks in Saltillo. That's been a gift to me.
Absolutely. Okay, so final question I ask all my guests. The motto of Positive Vibes is keep on the sunny side. So we'll go to Kathy first. Kathy, how do you keep on the sunny side?
Well, I'm so glad I had this question ahead of time because I gave it a lot of thought. Um, I'm generally a positive person anyway, but I got to thinking about that. And for me, it kind of starts with internal reflection on what things in life bring me joy or satisfaction. And then I actively pursue projects that align with those things. And that way, my efforts and energy are more intentionally placed. And that gives me a lot of joy. I have this project was a huge one for me that I got a lot of satisfaction out of, and it aligned with my family interest. But there are other projects that I do that are tied to things that just give me joy. And if I start with that, then I stay on the sunny side.
I love that. Start with joy. Love it. Okay, Leon, what about you? How do you keep on the sunny side?
Uh, my father was a Baptist minister for 63 years, and I saw him minister to people in so many different ways. And I asked him one time, I said, "How do you go when you go to someone and someone's called you and the worst possible thing that could happen has happened? What do you say to them?" And he said, I don't really say anything. I listen. And so listening to people is and hearing their stories. It helps me as a reporter, obviously, because a reporter should be listening a whole lot more than they should be talking. And also, I'm finding joy in the small things in life, which are often free. I tell my students, I told my students when I was at MTSU teaching that every day two miraculous things happen. The sun comes up and it goes down. And both times it's usually pretty interesting to watch. Sometimes it's absolutely stunningly beautiful. Other times in the morning when the fog is around, it's beautiful in another way. But take advantage of those moments when you can reflect that you are here for another day. Go out and live it.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. That's fantastic. Well, thank you both for being on the Positive Vibes podcast. Listeners, get this book; it will blow your mind. And both of you, thank you so much for bringing the book into the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Positive Vibes on the Sunny Side. If you'd like to support Positive Vibes, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/ on the sunny side. That's BUY me, ME, a coffee.com/ on the sunny side. And the link will be in the show notes. Any amount you choose will help this podcast moving forward, and it's so appreciated. And also, please tell others, your friends and family, about the podcast and hit subscribe or follow for this podcast on whichever platform you like to listen to and use for your podcasts. Or if you're on the YouTube channel, please subscribe to the channel so you won't miss an episode going forward. That will also help others discover this podcast because the more followers and subscribers a podcast has, the more the platform shows it to other people who might not have discovered it otherwise. So I really appreciate your help and your support. And this is Yasmine signing off until next time and reminding you to keep on the sunny side.